Hello and welcome to our roundtable discussion on the Chinese Communist Party's forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners in China, on how we, the people, can help the G7 leaders to stand up for our human rights, and how the grassroots G7+7 petition is developing worldwide to help end these crimes against humanity. I'd like to let you know that you can participate in today's discussion by sending in your questions to our panelists via the Q&A function that you'll find on the side. But before we start, please allow me to welcome our audience watching on live stream via NTD and Epoch TV. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm sorry to announce that Mr. Janis, Canadian MP and co-founder member of IPAC, had to cancel his participation at the very last minute, but he has kindly sent us a short video of his remarks for today's discussion. Let's now listen in to Mr. Janis. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you about the important topic of forced organ harvesting and trafficking. When I was first elected, we began the process of trying to get a bill passed in Canada on forced organ harvesting and trafficking that would end the complicity of Canadians in this vile activity. The bill was to make it a criminal offense for a person to go abroad and receive an organ that had been taken without consent. And it took a lot of work getting this through the parliamentary process, and it took longer than it should have. But eventually we were able to pass legislation here in Canada that makes it a criminal offense for someone to go abroad and receive an organ taken without consent. And one critical thing I want to encourage to friends and partners around the world is to look to adopt similar legislation in your countries if you haven't already. Many of you know about how organs are taken from Falun Gong practitioners and others. People are killed for their organs and they're used for transplant. But part of what drives that is the demand for these organs. And some of that demand for organs comes from outside of China itself, where this organ harvesting and trafficking is happening. So one critical thing that all of us can do is try to cut off that supply from other countries, to prohibit the receipt of organs in contexts where there isn't consent, and also to raise awareness about this, so that people aren't going to receive organs in contexts where someone's human rights have been violated to get that organ, but maybe they're not aware of it. So raising awareness, passing prohibitions like we've done in Canada, and we need to continue to speak out about these abuses and challenge the CCP officials that are involved in this to stop this action, to end the persecution of various minorities inside China, and to end forced organ harvesting and trafficking. This is a grievous violation of fundamental human rights. Obviously, it's horrific that it has happened and continues to happen. So we need to end complicity by those who are in Western countries, and do what we can to call this out, hold perpetrators of human rights abuses accountable, and stop these actions from happening. Once again, thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm sorry that I can't actually be available at the time of the panel, but I really appreciate this opportunity to share some reflections on this important topic, and I wish you very well in the conversations that are happening.
Thank you, Mr. Janis, for these important recommendations. So let's now move on to our panel and dive straight in. Mr. Janis raises three main points: complicity of Canadians, raising awareness, and ending the persecution and forced organ harvesting, and holding the perpetrators accountable. Mr. Muse, thank you for attending today's discussion. We'd like to have you start us off. Do you have any comments on these three main points?
Yes, and thank you for the invitation to participate, and I appreciate hearing the perspective of the experts. And I know Mr. Matus will speak. My information and my knowledge and awareness of this issue stems from the report that he co-authored with Honorable David Kilgore, because my predecessor was actually on the Canadian Parliament's subcommittee on international human rights at that time, and there was a lot of discussion. And in terms of the points that my colleague, Mr. Janis, just mentioned, and he has certainly been a leading voice on this issue for a number of years. Complicity with the legislation that Canada has put in, that we obviously, as Mr. Dennis said, would love to see other countries adopt, so that if a Canadian citizen is going abroad and benefiting from an organ that was harvested against their will, that is a criminal offense in Canada, and so that's an important step. I wasn't a member of Parliament when this was passed through Canadian Parliament, but certainly defer to the parliamentary expertise of Mr. Generous. But obviously, this is all about raising awareness of this issue, because I think there's a lot of people that are not aware that this is actually happening. Back a few weeks ago on Parliament Hill, there was the annual demonstration by practitioners of Falun Dafa, extolling, of course, the virtues of.
Now you saw it. All good.
Extolling the virtues of truth and compassion and tolerance, and certainly what's happening with organ harvesting is the very opposite of that, and the persecution taking place at the hands of the Chinese Communist regime. And so, I look forward to hearing the perspective, but both on behalf of Mr. Generous and myself, and there are others, because there were people from all political parties in Canada that spoke to the practitioners there and talked about the persecution taking place in China. It's important for you to know that you do have friends in the Parliament of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Appreciate that. And we appreciate your continued support every year. Mr. Matus, I'd like to address you now. First off, thank you for participating in today's discussion. How serious and far-reaching is complicity for Canadians and the international community?
Well, we don't have statistics of movement, and the legislation that was passed is important, but we need some complementary legislation to make it effective. One thing we do need is compulsory reporting by health practitioners of patients who've engaged in transplant tourism to countries where there's known to be abuse, so that we can get some idea of the volume. Right now, it's only anecdotal evidence, and so there's more to be done to make the law effective than what we already have.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. And you've done a lot of work yourself to raise awareness on that, and with your various publications. I'd like to turn now to Professor Chung. David, could you mute your mic for us?
Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Chung, thank you for participating in today's roundtable. We'd like to know, how important is it to raise awareness on forced organ harvesting?
It is very important, because right now, not a lot of people know about that. The forced organ harvesting issue is one of the most egregious human rights abuse in China, and also it is a genocide. So I can talk more about the genocide piece later, but basically it is a genocide that not a lot of people are aware of it, but it's happening, and it's still happening. In 2020, the China Tribunal, which is a people's tribunal, ruled that it is still happening, and Falun Gong practitioners are the major targets of this human rights abuse in China.
Okay, thank you. And yes, it's been going on for decades now, and continues to, which people don't realize the extent and gravity of it. So I'm happy that you are all here. Dr. Weber, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. As a medical doctor, surgeon, and former transplant surgeon, why is it important to end forced organ harvesting from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's clearly that forced organ harvesting counteracts or undermines the altruistic organ donation systems we have worldwide. We have them in the United States, we do have them in Eurotransplant, in the European Union, and also in other individual countries. So if we have a perpetrator like a state-sanctioned forced organ harvesting, it undermines everything based on an ethical medical practice. Yeah, and if we are not careful about this atrocity, and we do not try to counteract it and stop it, we are in danger that those medical practices also will be delivered to our countries. And this is actually something that has already started via the Belt and Road Initiative, in a way that I think it was in 2015, they already started exporting tools for organ preservation. I remember in the time when I did organ transplantation, I was on an explant team, that we had a little device for kidneys. It was like an eggshell, a little bigger, maybe like a football or something, and you could preserve a kidney in it for a longer time. And now we have seen studies from February this year that the Chinese surgeons use the same device for liver transplantations. And so we have to be very, very careful that we put this practice under scrutiny on an international level, and that we have people within China which are independent medical and human rights experts who put this under scrutiny. Otherwise, I'm afraid that via the Belt and Road Initiative, we are threatened that this practice will be delivered into our countries.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Weber, I have a follow-up question. Do you know of any, from your experience being a surgeon yourself, do you know of any other country in the world that is participating in state-sanctioned organ harvesting as China is?
You mean state-sanctioned forced organ harvesting, right? So no, we see this practice in different countries, but not on a state-sanctioned level, and not on such a gigantic scale. We have Libya, for example, where forced organ harvesting is happening. We have Cayman Islands, where we know it's happening. We have problems in the Ukraine, and but like it's done by the CCP, we do not have any proof for this. We can just guess that something is happening in other countries, but we don't have as much proof for it as we do in China.
Great, thank you for that. I'd like to now turn the floor to Mr. Muse. Could you explain more on the Belt and Road Initiative for us, please?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, could you explain or expand more on the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, I think that there's concern that there's the expansion of the Chinese Communist regime into other countries, and so that's a cause for concern.
Thank you. Okay, in attendance today as one of the panelists is Mr. Huang. Thank you for attending our roundtable. Mr. Jennis spoke of the persecution of minorities as a victim of the Chinese state's persecution of Falun Gong. Could you briefly describe why Falun Gong is persecuted and how?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. I can think of a couple of reasons. The first one is the popularity of Falun Gong. Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, was introduced to public in May 1992. Only 7 years, it's attracted over 70 million practitioners across the country. It's very popular and grew very fast. The second reason is the ideological contrast between CCP and Falun Gong. Falun Gong advocates truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, which has peaceful nature. But on the other hand, CCP believe in Marxism, atheism, and class struggle, that kind of violence. So it's very different. The third one is Zen leader Jiang Zemin, the CCP leader Jiang Zemin. He is very jealous of popularity of Falun Gong. Also, Falun Gong practitioners are so respectful to our master, Mr. Li Hongzhi. So all this kind of reasons combined together, eventually CCP launched the persecution of Falun Gong from July 1999.
Thank you for that. And, I think the audience would like to hear more about your firsthand experience, how it impacted you, your family, your life in China, and how close you came to possibly having, undergoing forced organ harvesting.
Sure. So this very horrible story, even harder to recall. I was in jail for 5 years totally, just because my belief in Falun Gong, truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, is very unbelievable to outside of China. I was a PhD student at that time from a prestigious university in Beijing. From end of 2000 to end of 2005, I spent totally 5 years in prison, experienced all kinds of different tortures, abuses, including high voltage electric baton shocking, deprivation of sleep for almost whole months, mental and physically isolation for almost 1 year. Also, we were forced to do slave labor, high hour, like at least 16 hours a day. We were forced to make all kind of handmade stuff, like plastic flower for decoration, Christmas tree for Christmas tree light chain, or Spider-Man toy, or necklace for women, to name a few. Also, we were forced to process the food, pistachio nuts. We were forced to use a big iron plier to open the hard shell of the nuts. The workload was very high. When I just came to USA in 2008, I saw exactly products we made in China were sold here in grocery store, technically made in China with very low price. I was very shocked at that time. So, my personal experience is just the tip of the iceberg of the whole persecution. And also, I was blood tested as well when I was in jail. I was very healthy at that time, but I was blood tested, and also definitely the guard would not care about my health. That's not for my health reason. At that time I didn't know about the forced organ harvesting, but when I was released, I heard about the forced organ harvesting. Then I was very scared, because it's possible I could be a victim of the forced organ harvesting. Obviously, CCP is collecting the blood sample to create a database for Falun Gong practitioners as a potential victim of the forced organ harvesting.
Thank you for opening up and sharing on that. It sounds like a very difficult experience. Mr. Huang, did you know anyone in your prison there that actually was a victim of forced organ harvesting? Was there any talk of that, or was that not known at the time?
When I was in jail, that's before 2005, the forced organ harvesting not surfaced yet. So at that time, I didn't know about this. But after I came to USA in 2008, I saw a news pop out on the internet that says several, at least, the leader of that prison committed the crime of forced organ harvesting from prisoners to sell for profit. They make a lot of money from that practice. I heard the story populated on the internet from the prison I was persecuted.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yep,
I have a question here. This is a question from the public who's attending live, and this is for anyone in the panel here. Why don't we hear about this atrocity in mainstream media? Does anyone have anything to add or share on that?
I could maybe say something about that. I think it's a combination of factors. One is we don't have somebody who can actually stand up and say this happened to me. I mean, there's one person who survived who has talked about it, but the others don't. All you've got is perpetrators and victims. It's not done in a public space. It's done in confined quarters. The records are not available. I mean, the media will report often what they see, you've got this imbalance simply because this is something the media cannot see, Then, of course, there's a lot of Communist Party leverage. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party will not allow media into China if they don't report the way the Chinese like. And so what you do get is often reporters or media trading off access for reporting the way the party likes. And I think we've seen that with some well. So there's I would say a combination of those factors, and it's also, I mean, because this is so unusual. Some people, even when they hear about it, find it hard to believe. It's not something we've seen historically. It's not something we've seen in other countries, and it's just so out of the norm that it hasn't sort of got the. Even when you tell people about it, it doesn't connect with what they know and what they've experienced. So it's hard to get a real awareness just by telling people about it.
Thank you for that, David, Mr. Native. And I think it's true. It's a fascinating point you bring up, because people in the Western world, they don't fully understand the Communist Party's way of handling things, thinking about things, and how they treat their own people oftentimes. So I understand that many people would recoil at even a thought of state-sanctioned forced organ harvesting taking place in current day. So I appreciate that point. Maria, I see your hand up. Please add.
Thank you.
Oh, you are muted.
Sorry. Even the Chinese Communist regime arranged journalists to go to see a hospital who is doing transplants. You just see the operation theater. You don't see who's behind the operation, who are the victims, until you call them and ask for, I need an organ, and they would tell you that it is available in 2 weeks. And you ask, I need a fresh organ, and is it Falun Gong practitioners? Some of them will say yes, but not until you do that. A tour is a show tour, and the operation room, once it's done, is clean, and you didn't see anything. So it's very hard to really get evidence. However, eyewitness and also whistleblowers, they sent information and they did testimony, and from there, that the David Kilgore started the investigation, and then get trails of evidence to show that it is from prisoners of conscience.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chung there. That's a great point. And the two Davids did a fantastic job with that publication years ago. I think this is a good segue. I'd like to ask you, Professor Chung, what is the difference between organ trafficking that we hear about, even in Western countries, compared to forced organ harvesting in China?
We heard a lot about organ trafficking, especially in certain developing countries, South America, India. They are mostly people who sold their organs. So there's a certain way of consent, in a sense, although, mostly because they are poor, they have to use that channel to get some money to save their family. However, they are willingly to donate or willingly to sell. And usually it's just one kidney, so the person still survive. Forced organ harvesting is totally different. There's no consent. Is unwillingly extracting organs from some people who have no consent to donate their organs. And in China, we know that it's not just one kidney, but major organs. So the major organs, including lungs, heart, and they have price tags that attached to these organs in their website in the early 2000s, like when there were lots of trafficking, external transplant tourists going to China. They have a lot of website information telling people they are open sources and with a price tag. In Israel, there's a doctor, Dr. Lavi, who had patients going to China and shocked him that they could do a heart transplant prearranged. So that would mean someone has to die in order to give the heart to another waiting patient. So forced organ harvesting is totally a violation of human rights, and there's no consent from the person.
Thank you, Professor. And Mr. Matus, I see your hand up.
This is kind of a combination of the two questions you asked, because you'd asked me before about numbers, and I was explaining it's difficult. And I think the problem of numbers ties into the problem of awareness, because we get into this vicious circle. People don't know how big the problem is, and as a result, they don't show much appreciation about the need to do something about it. And because they don't have much awareness, they don't do much about it. I had actually proposed in the Senate, when this bill that Garnet Jennings was talking about was going through Parliament, that there be a provision in the bill about compulsory reporting, and the Senate put it in the bill, and then it went to the House of Commons. The House of Commons stripped it from the bill on the basis that it was provincial jurisdiction, and then the bill passed. And so then we wrote to all the provinces and asked them to impose compulsory reporting, and none of them have done it. There's an MLA in BC who's sort of interested in the issue, but that's as far as we've got. And and of course, this is a problem not just for Canada, because we don't have compulsory reporting pretty much anywhere except Taiwan, and obviously Taiwan knows a lot about the problem, so they're doing something about it. But even then, their compulsory reporting, although it's required, the results are not public, so we don't know what the volumes are. Israel set up an inspection system, not a reporting system, which is an alternative, but again, they haven't published the results. So we don't have figures, and as a result of the fact we don't have figures, we don't have the mobilization we should and the awareness we should.
Thank you, Mr. Matus. Now, I'm curious, what is your, why do you believe Canada, the provinces of Canada are hesitant with compulsory reporting?
We get, I would say that the doctors on the whole wouldn't object to aggregate reporting with identities removed, but they don't want to criminalize their patients. Yet there's of course compulsory reporting in a lot of other areas like gunshot wounds and child abuse. So although I appreciate the concern, I think it's something we have to deal with rather than just accede to.
Thank you, Mr. Matus. Appreciate that. And I believe I saw Dr. Weber's hand go up. Would you like to respond to this?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to point out again, not only from a medical perspective, that forced organ harvesting is really a crime. It's a horrible crime. So maybe if you look at legislation in different countries, and we do have this problem in Germany, it's always difficult to pass laws through different, let's say, arenas of political acting. But we have to make the people aware of it, and also the politicians around the world, that this is a contract murder. And so the question I'd like to raise is, if a contract murder is being committed this way, what about complicity, even of patients? And if you look at the worldwide spanning network on forced organ harvesting of people, getting people connected to hospitals in China and everything around it, we should try to make the legislation even more strict also on the patients, because it's a crime from both sides, and we have to ask what are our moral values on this, and if we want to have this continue the way it is right now.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Weber. I wonder, while you, in your days of being a surgeon, was this being talked about amongst surgeons, or was this not known in the profession?
Well, so it was before 2006 actually that I was working on the transplant field. Back then, we always had problems for the preservation times of the organs, and it's basically it was unthinkable for us to do organ transplantations on such a large scale, because people were so happy to find a matching organ at all. So we did not talk about it, but somehow people fantasized about ways how to get more organ supply. But of course, we never thought about murder or something. Yeah, it's basically that the discussion is always shifted to the receiver of the organ and not to the donor of the organ. So the receiver of organs are overrepresented, you can say, in a way. So I can imagine, from my perspective as a doctor, even also in the name of my patients, that maybe if I would be a surgeon in China getting so much money on one hand, like multiple times of my yearly salary for one transplantation, for example, and then from the other perspective, I would have like hundreds of patients waiting on a waiting list. It's very difficult not to get lured by this, yeah. And also in terms of, let's say, of career management or something. So it's such a heinous thing, and we really have to inform the doctors and the medical societies about what's going on and how horrible this is, especially from the perspective of the victims.
Thank you. And perhaps even in China, the doctors performing these have huge incentives. Mr. David Matus, I see your hand went up.
I would say that although we need compulsory reporting, I don't think it's necessary to criminalize the patients, even if in theory they could be prosecuted, because I know with Israel, the prohibition goes against the patients, but there's no penalty for the patients. It's somewhat like drug trafficking. You can't find the drug traffickers if you can't talk to the users. And you need to be able to find out who the patients are, to find out about the networks, the brokerage, the advertising, the connections that make this happen. So, I mean, obviously some patients will be very complicit and know what they're doing, but the patients aren't told we're going to kill somebody for their organs. They're told something completely different. So many of them, they just think there's more availability in China, and so I think we need to break through that in order to get at the problem. I will say also, although we don't know numbers, we get a lot of anecdotal evidence, and we don't hear a lot. I don't think the volumes in Canada are large, but with Germany, I think they're larger, because we hear from anecdotal evidence that other patients we talk to say they see Germans in China at the hospitals.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, David, thank you. This is actually a huge problem. Just today, I've learned on a film premiere from a scholar who is working with the Dutch Parliament that Germany is actually one of the first buyers of organ transplants in China. And for me personally, I know of 3 cases already. And for example, I know one woman, and we have everything, blood types, names, where she comes from, cities. Of course, I cannot reveal it, and I won't. But she's an alcoholic, unfortunately, and she is not able to get on the transplant list of Eurotransplant. So she traveled to China 3 times, yeah, extremely short waiting times. She got 3 livers 3 times, and she paid about $400,000 each. Imagine what's happening over there, and the people are so afraid of losing their lives. They pay any price, and this is exactly what the CCP and those doctors are taking advantage of, and this really has to stop. I mean, also I know of patients who got heart transplants in China, And this is a terrible problem in Germany. And one of the legislative problems we have is that the transplant laws are basically being looked over by the medical community itself. Yeah. So this is a different string of lawmaking, and I'm kind of struggling right now myself with working with members of parliament to find the right angle to install such a law like we have in America, for example, like the Falun Protection Act, because we really want to make sure, not only from Germany, also from the European perspective, that patients do not get complicit in this horrible crime.
Thank you, Doctor. I'd like to ask Mr. Muse, do you have any comments on this? I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I think as Mr. Matus mentioned and referred to, and of course the surgeons, the perspective of what's happening in Germany, and that's why it was, of course, the genesis of the legislation in Canada, which certainly helps address that complicity. If a Canadian citizen is traveling to get such an organ, they'd be, of course, chargeable under the criminal offense in Canada. And it was a senator that brought that forward, but that obviously took place just after the last federal election in 2021. I mean, the original report that Mr. Matus and David Kilgore wrote on this with some accounts in there was in 2006. So it's a long period of time that it took to get in the legislative process that a senator would champion that issue. It originated from the Senate of Canada, had to pass through the Senate, then it went to the House of Commons, where it was amended slightly, and as has been pointed out, there were some provisions that probably weakened its impact. But the whole issue really comes back down to one of awareness. It took that long for any sort of legislation to come to the fore here in Canada, and other countries have yet to act. And there isn't that awareness, and this whole discussion around numbers to quantify it, that makes it less interesting from the perspective of the public to quantify just exactly what is the scale of this, the impact of this. Mr. Wong's personal accounts and having been through and seen firsthand, I mean, obviously horrifying accounts of what he underwent in prison, both in terms of torture, the electrocution, but also the forced labor, which is a whole separate issue when we talk about the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, but also in other the Uyghurs and other minority groups by the Chinese Communist regime. And we've had legislation in Canada and other places with regard to forced labor too. And it was interesting to hear Mr. Wong's perspective that coming to the United States after 2008 and seeing the fruits of his labor on the store shelf at such a cheap price. I mean, that's another aspect. And so it's an ongoing awareness issue. That is part of what obviously today's panel discussion is about, what the petition is about. And so hopefully this will continue, and more governments will either decide to act in terms of addressing the complicity issue, but also calling out the persecution that's going on, and there needs to be more voices raised.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Now it's clear that the main subject of the G7 meeting may well be the Iran situation. Forced organ harvesting is happening in China. Iran has a lifeline to China. If you want to stop the war in Iran, address the lifeline to China by talking about forced organ harvesting. Mr. Muse, I'd like to address you again. What is the G7's actual position on China's human rights abuses?
Yeah, I don't speak for the government of Canada in terms of our position at the G7. I'm an opposition member in Parliament, but obviously there's a number of issues on the agenda of the G7. A lot, predominantly economic. versus some of these other issues that are going on, and clearly the backdrop of what's happening in the Middle East over the last few days is going to loom large over the atmosphere of the discussions. But I think from what I've read, there tends to be more of an economic thrust than anything else of what's going on there.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. David Matus here, why are the G7 leaders so important for human rights in China, and what can they do?
Well, China basically represses its own NGO community or its own public, and engages in transnational repression with the NGO community abroad. But they value very highly being part of the international community. I mean, China didn't even have a seat in the UN for decades, and it was Taiwan that had the China seat. And they will take seriously what governments say, much more so than what the media says or what the NGO sector says. So that reality gives us leverage over China as long as the governments are willing to do something and say something. And you will see when the government says something about China, there's movement in China that you don't see when it comes from people like us.
Yes, thank you. Professor Chuang, I'd like to ask you now. Oh, David, could you please mute your mic there? Thank you. This is for Professor here. I'd like to know, could you speak on the CCP transnational repression of Falun Gong, please?
The CCP has exported its hate propaganda since the start of the persecution of Falun Gong since 1999. So transnational repression is basically a foreign interference, and they have put these disinformation, misinformation out to the rest of the world since the persecution. So the transnational repression includes the control of media and also surveillance, intimidation, harassment of Falun Gong practitioners outside China. So even though practitioners have fled China, they are not safe because they're still subjected to these harassment and surveillance, and even brought back these harassment to their own families in China. So it is something that we need to be paying a lot of attention to, especially for the G7 leaders. It is affecting all the countries that are coming to the meeting this time. So we need to really look into all the experiences that Falun Gong practitioners have over the years, especially the control of media, because the disinformation is all over the place right now. Like I quote the Reuters Institute, they found that since 2009, for 10 years or so, China has spent $6.6 billion to have their global media presence, including exchange programs with Western media, and also bilateral agreements like having inserts of the mouthpieces of CCP in the mainstream media press. Not to mention that most of the Chinese media have already been bought out by the CCP, except one or two, like Epoch Times, that are independent of the CCP control. So they're spreading a lot of disinformation, and this disinformation actually prevent people in the West to support the victim groups, which is Falun Gong. So we need to pay attention to the control of the media and all the disinformation that is spread around. And the public inquiry on foreign interference had a conclusion that disinformation is becoming a very strong, challenging situation for the world to comprehend, because it's not easy to prove, but there are trails of evidence that we can look into. So when we see certain reports on the Falun Gong, we need to really look into the layers, what's behind that, and be able to analyze and be able to really differentiate what is real information from disinformation.
Mr. David Mavis, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, well, you asked Mr. Moyes earlier about Belt and Road, and that, to a certain extent, I would say, is a vehicle for transnational repression and foreign interference. I mean, China uses trade for leverage. They're basically trying through all their contexts, foreign donations, foreign aid, to work against anything that's critical of them. There's one other point, if I might make, about numbers. I mean, we don't know Canadian numbers and German numbers, but what we know is Chinese numbers, because the Chinese hospitals actually used to post their numbers on their website before China shut it down. And what we were doing by looking at the Chinese numbers is getting up to 100,000 transplants a year. I mean, the number is just huge. It's beyond belief. And obviously, and the donation systems are more or less non-existent. They produce tiny numbers. So it's the numbers in themselves speak to what a huge problem we've got.
It's a very important point. Thank you. I'd like to direct a question now to Dr. Weber, and this is about how Iran has a lifeline to China, from China, and how can forced organ harvesting, bringing it up and speaking about it, how can it interrupt that lifeline and the economic ties between China and Iran, but also protect the economy of the G7 countries?
Yeah, this is a difficult geopolitical question, and I think I cannot sort this out to 100%. But what it does basically, it shows how China acts all the time, also when doing business with us or the G7 countries. They're gaslighting us, with numbers, with their abilities, with everything, and also the ties between Iran and China. If you look at them, we don't really know how much cash flow or money flow there is between the two countries. I mean, officially, they might sell rare earths or something, but maybe it's just about weapons or whatever. So this whole thing seems to be a scheme which is so blurred that it's like a nebula. Yeah, and if you look at the G7 countries and the Belt and Road Initiative, and how China closes up its markets from the European markets, for example, but wants full access to our markets. So this is basically the same mechanism behind everything, just like they are acting in the medical field. So it's difficult to trust China, to put it in a few words.
I have a question for Mr. Muse here. Why are governments at ease when they speak about the Uyghurs, which we've heard much in the news in the past, but when it comes to Falun Gong, a sudden silence befalls everyone? Was China successful in controlling Western politicians?
Well, I mean, I think that's a matter of perspective. I mean, certainly people like Mr. Generous and myself and others don't make that distinction. That one is that forced organ harvesting is worse than the treatment of the Uyghurs, which is clearly a genocide, and they're and I think that the Canadian Parliament has had, of course, the legislation that was adopted in 2022, 2021, 2022 with regard to forced organ harvesting, but also has had discussions around the products of forced labor, particularly with respect to the Uyghurs. So, and I know that the U.S. Congress has as well had those discussions. So, I mean, I think that's, I think that both of those two issues are just examples, again, if we raise it up, of the Chinese Communist Party and what they are doing, and the reference, of course, was to the Belt and Road Initiative as well. They're trying the sphere of influence, but I wouldn't agree that one is viewed as more a greater wrongdoing than the other. It's a matter of awareness, where there is more awareness of how the Uyghurs are being treated, and what's happening in that western part of China versus the forced harvesting of organs issue.
Yes, Mr. Matus, please.
I do have something to add here. The government of Canada recently issued sanctions against a number of Chinese officials because of the persecution of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Falun Gong. China, in return, issued sanctions against 20 Canadians, including myself. They say because of our giving the Canadian government false information about Uyghurs and Tibetans, Falun Gong wasn't mentioned. And it was an interesting, I would say, omission. And the reality is, with the Canadian or the various foreign governments, on the whole, I would say that they try to deal with all victims equally, but China doesn't. China sees Falun Gong as the primary problem because, I mean, with the Uyghurs, the Hong Kong, the Tibetans, Taiwanese, they could all have their way, and the Chinese Communist Party would still be in charge of China. But the Falun Gong are Han Chinese. They're everywhere in China. They're bigger than the Communist Party. If the Falun Gong were, well, at least the way the party saw it, if the Falun Gong were left alone, the party would disappear, and it would China would cease to be communist. So the Chinese see Falun Gong as their number one threat, and I've seen this, through discussions, negotiations. You talk with the Chinese about Uyghurs and so on. They'll get angry, they'll denounce. They'll criticize. You talk to them about Falun Gong, they walk out of the room. It's the end of the discussion. So what happens is governments will engage in trade-offs, or NGOs as well. They figure, we need to talk to them about something, and if they're not going to if they're going to walk out of the room because of Falun Gong, we've got to talk about something else. And I think that's the dynamic we're faced with.
Yes, Maria, please add in. And could you also, Professor, could you also expand on why you believe Falun Gong is the main victim here?
It's about awareness. When Falun Gong was being persecuted, then the world knows about, what is Falun Gong? Falun Gong is basically very indigenous to traditional culture. So before the persecution, not many people in the West really know about Falun Gong. So when the persecution started, there were some media responses. However, when the persecution really go up, the media response actually went down, and is disproportionately less media reports on Falun Gong when the persecution actually went up, and especially in the climax of 2005, 2006, when forced organ harvesting issue was being reviewed to the world. So the Falun Gong wasn't very familiar to the West, while Tibetan or other Uyghurs are a little bit more familiar to the outside world. The other factor is the disinformation that CCP started once they treated the Falun Gong, when they cracked down the Falun Gong. So the world were contaminated by information that cannot really represent the Falun Gong real stories. So I called it a cold genocide because it is hidden and concealed. And CCP used a lot of ways to make it invisible. So part of it is making it subtle. And also it is normalized. So they make their citizens believe that suppressing Falun Gong is normal. It should be. And using a lot of their narratives to also spread through the world, through their transnational repression tactics, to let the world believe that these disinformation are correct. So it makes people find it very difficult to really understand what's going on with the Falun Gong. Although it is a genocide because it fits into the definition that there is a clear intent to kill and eradicate the Falun Gong. So it is a genocide, but it is a hidden one.
Thank you, Professor. As we wrap up, Mr. Moyes, could you give us your last words after today's discussion?
Yeah, I think I certainly appreciate hearing the different perspective, both the first witness account, but also the experts from different perspectives as to what's going on. Because I think, again, fundamentally, this is an issue of continuing to raise awareness of what's going on and urging action. And that's what today's discussion is focused on. And it's encouraging to hear that there is some mounting numerical evidence as well, because that's going to help shine the spotlight. But amongst the various issues that the Chinese Communist Party is inflicting upon the world, this is one, and that continued discussion is important.
Fantastic, thank you. Professor Chung and Dr. Weber are the representatives of two NGOs, the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China and Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. Last year, these two NGOs came together to initiate a global petition against forced organ harvesting called the G7+7 Petition. Professor Chung, could you tell us what this petition is all about?
It is to urge the G7+7 country leaders during their summit in Canada to pay attention to this humanitarian concern, to do something about it. Like Mr. Mater said, have their legislation changed so that they are not complicit, and also raise awareness to stop this forced organ harvesting that is going on. So the forced organ harvesting petition, the main target, the main victim is Falun Gong, but not only Falun Gong. They are also doing this because they are having the technology to also do it in large scale in other groups like Uyghurs or Tibetans or Christians. So the petition is to ask the leaders to act upon it, to call to action, to act upon this forced organ harvesting issue in China.
Fantastic, thank you. We are running a little late as we come to a close here. I have one more question for Dr. Weber. Could you give us an update on the success of the G7+7 petition?
Yes, I'd love to. So we think the petition is very successful already. So after 1 year, we've collected already 197,250 signatures. And this petition seems to develop a dynamic. And talking to people who are collecting signatures on the streets, for example, during rallies or human rights events, they all share one experience, basically. And this is when people hear about forced organ harvesting for the first time, they want to do something against it. It's so horrible for them to know this and to hear about it, that they really want to do something. And we'd like to promise those people and everyone who wants to sign the petition that this petition will go on until the CCP stops forced organ harvesting and allows independent investigations in their countries. Yeah, and we're not talking about investigations by the CCP leadership or anyone connected to it. And this is what this petition is about to do.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we can close today's roundtable. I'd like to thank our honored speakers for their inspiring discussion, and we hope that our viewers are now better updated on these crimes and what they can do about them. The atrocities of forced organ harvesting from living prisoners of conscience can no longer be accepted in today's global community. Do we want to live in a world where a government can arbitrarily kill innocent people for their organs, or should we speak up now? Tomorrow, the G7 will be holding their 3-day annual summit, and we should help them find the courage to defend our values, our human rights, and our medical ethics. Forced organ harvesting is happening in China. Iran has its lifeline to China. If you want to stop the war in Iran, address the lifeline to China by talking about forced organ harvesting. It's time for the G7 to take the lead to end this atrocity in China. If you want to help break the silence on these crimes, please click on the link below to sign the petition. And please tell your friends and family how important it is to support this petition to protect and uphold human rights and medical ethics. Thank you and goodbye.